Hi everyone, my name is Amit. I am a website designer and developer. I have been doing website design and development for over 15 years now. One of the very important aspects of web design is typography, and since last 5 years, I have been learning it through some courses as well as by applying it to real world projects. I've created this video to share everything I've learned so you don't have to spend 5 years to learn like I did. In this video, I'm specifically focusing on typography for the web. While the fundamental principle of typography apply to both web design and graphic design, but there are some differences like line length, which is critical for web readability, but might not be as relevant in graphic design. On the other hand, kerning, which is often fine-tuned in logo design, is not really needed in web design. This video is all about typography for web design. And if you are a web designer or new to design, then this video is surely going to be helpful for you. Let's get started. If your typography is done right, you'll not need to rely heavily on other graphic elements to make your site look attractive. Sounds surprising? Let me show you what I mean. Take a look at these websites. They rely mostly on large headings and quality images, but no fancy graphics, just smart use of typography. Here's another example, a website with well-organized typography where the text layout alone carries most of the visual aspects. In this entire course, you'll come across these three terminologies: typeface, fonts, and typography. I want to explain them in very simple words. Arial, Times New Roman, Manrope, Instrument Serif, these are all typefaces. Now, if you specify like 30 pixel of Arial or 40 pixel of Times New Roman, 20 pixel of Manrope regular, 40 pixel italic of Instrument Serif, now it is font. And combining these fonts with proper spacing and arranging them aesthetically is typography. As simple as that. And I also want to suggest you to not to get caught up in terminologies, rather focus on what truly matters, which is your design. This course is divided in 10 chapters: evolution of web fonts, using single font, fonts with variation, line height, letter spacing, display fonts, line length, responsive typography, font pairing tips, and at last, my favorite fonts. This is a 1-hour course where I have tried to cover everything important from the basic to advanced concept of typography. You can watch it all at once or simply like and save it to your watch later list to finish it whenever you want. In the early days of web design, we were limited to fonts like Arial, Tahoma, Times New Roman, Tribuci, and Verdana, as we had to rely on fonts that were already installed on users' computer. Back then, web technologies and browsers were not advanced enough to support custom fonts, and we had to use fonts that are globally available on everyone's computer. But then everything changed after the browsers started to support importing custom fonts directly into our website, which means we could create a fonts folder in our project, add custom fonts, and be confident that they will render properly on any browsers. And also, Google released Google Fonts, which gave us access to thousands of free fonts. Today, we have even more options beyond Google Fonts like Adobe Fonts and FontShare. Yes, we now have the freedom to use almost any fonts we want, but with great freedom comes great responsibility. Choosing the right fonts is still a challenge, so let's try to learn which fonts are good to use for our design. For that, make sure you check next chapter of this video. One common mistake that many designers make, especially when starting out, is using too many fonts in their design. It's easy to get carried away when you have access to hundreds of beautiful fonts. But just because you can use multiple fonts does not mean you should. I have made this mistake myself. There was a time when I thought my design looks more interesting if I use at least 3 different fonts. But over time, I realized that wasn't the best approach. Using too many fonts can make your design feel messy and unstructured. When there are multiple fonts competing for attention, the viewer does not know where to focus. This can make a website feel inconsistent and unprofessional. Look at this website, where the heading is in one font, the body is in another, and the button use a completely different style of font. Now compare that to a design where a single font family is used throughout the entire page. The heading, body text, and buttons all feel connected. The design looks clean, polished, and easy to read. That's the power of consistency. Choosing the right font is already a big decision. And if you plan to use multiple fonts, knowing how to combine them effectively is an entirely different skill set, which takes years to master. If you are new to design, my best advice is to keep things simple. Stick to just one font. Now, you might be wondering which one font should you use? That's an important decision to make as well, and I'll guide you through how to pick the perfect font for your web design project in the next chapter of this video. When choosing a fonts for your design, it's important to pick one that offers a good range of variations. By variations, I mean different styles and weight like regular, bold, italic, light, medium, semi-bold, and many more. Instead of using multiple fonts to create contrast and hierarchy, you can achieve the same by sticking to one single font that has all the styles you need. For example, if you want your heading to stand out, you can use a bolder version of your font. For body text, you can use regular or lightweight. If you want to emphasize a specific word or phrase, you can use a italic version. Using a font with multiple weights and style also makes your design more flexible. You can establish a clear hierarchy without needing to mix and match different fonts. Now, where can you find fonts that offer these variations? Don't worry, there are plenty of free fonts that comes with full range of styles. Simply go to Google Fonts and scroll down. Click on Properties. Here, you can go for at least 5. Now you can see almost 482 fonts that have more than 5 variations. So, when you are choosing your font, don't just go for the one that looks cool at first glance. Think about long-term use cases and the flexibility they offer in terms of variations. Sticking to a single font family with variation can help in your website performance as well. Loading multiple fonts can slow down your website a little bit, and using a single font family with various styles and weight reduce the number of requests your site needs to make, which also means faster load time for your website. Line height is the vertical space between lines of text. It determines how tight or loose the text appears when written in 2 or more lines. If the line of text is too small, the text feels cramped and difficult to read. On the other hand, if it's too large, the lines feel disconnected, making the text appear disjoint. Here's an example. The first paragraph feels a bit too tight, while the second one feels overly spaced out. Now here's the same text with adjusted line height. It feels more open, balanced, and easier to read. In the web, by default, browsers set the line height to 1.2 or let's say 120%, which means if you do not specify line height, every element, whether it's large heading or small body text paragraph, will use 120% line height. While some large paragraph might look fine at 120%, body text typically needs more line height. That said, I've noticed some designers insist on using 150% for every scenario, but the truth is, not all fonts behave the same way. Some looks better with 150%, some with 180%, and some with 110%. It's all case by case. In this video, I've tried to explain how we can treat line height in different cases and different scenarios. Number 1. Wider the text block, more the line height. In the first example, I set the font size to 16 pixels with 150 line height, which works well in this case. However, when the same font size and line height are applied to longer and wider paragraph or text, the text can start to feel slightly cramped and dense. Here, I have increased the line height to 160%. Now the text becomes more readable and easier to read. Especially in wider layouts where the eyes has to travel further, this small adjustment improves readability and visual flow. Number 2. Serif fonts need more breathing room. When it comes to serif fonts, they naturally require more line height due to their decorative strokes. Taller accenter like H and D and deeper accenter like G and Y occupy more vertical space within the text block. If the spacing is too tight, these elements start to overlap visually, making the text feel cluttered and harder to read. In this example, I use the same font size, 16 pixel, and line height 160% as above, but it still feels cramped and dense. By increasing it to 190%, the text becomes more open and balanced and readable. Also, when working with serif fonts, it's not just about increasing line height. Slightly increasing the font size can further enhance readability, ensuring the text does not feel too tight, especially in long form content. Number 3. Bigger the heading, tighter the line height. Here, I use font size of 80 pixel with a 150% line height. While 150% generally works for body text, in this case, it feels disconnected and overly spaced. When dealing with larger fonts, using a lower line height creates a more cohesive and visually balanced look. Instead of 150%, reducing the line height to 120% makes the text feel more structured, readable, and visually pleasing. As font size increases, line height should decrease to maintain a balance and natural flow. Larger headings with excessive line height can feel disconnected, while tighter spacing keeps them organized, structured, and focused. There's no universal rule for line height, and instead of rigidly following a rule, it's better to adjust the line height based on readability, font characteristic, and overall design aesthetic. Every fonts behave differently. Some requires more breathing room, while other works well with tighter space. The goal isn't just to follow a 1.5 or a certain rule, but to create a balanced and comfortable reading experiences. But to make things easier, here's a simple formula. Well, I don't want to complicate you with this. Let me simplify. Wider the text block, the more the line height. Serif fonts require more line height than sans fonts. The larger the font size, the smaller the line height, and vice versa. To help you see how these concepts can apply in a real project, I've created this design where I have used different line heights for various font sizes. In this design, you'll notice the larger font size at the top. Since it's a single line, I have used 100% line height. On the right, the text is set to 26 pixel with 130% line height. And below that, there's a 18 pixel font size with a 150% line height. For a larger heading, I've opted for like 120% line height to keep it more structured and balanced. Similarly, for the paragraph with 30 pixel font size, I use 130% line height, and for the one with 20% font size right here, I applied a 140% line height. Here's another page. The block page where I use a serif font in the heading. As mentioned earlier, for serif fonts, it's better to use a larger line height. So for the 96 pixel of font size, which is a serif font, I've applied a 140% of line height. For the body text, which is set to 18 pixel, I use 150% line height to ensure readability and comfortable reading experience. So this approach helps create a clear visual hierarchy while maintaining good spacing throughout the content. In the case of mobile, we apply slightly different treatment to line height and typography as a whole due to constraint of smaller screen sizes. I've covered these mobile specific typography adjustment in next video in this lesson. So be sure to check out to understand how to optimize typography for mobile design. By the way, if you have noticed, I've used two different types of font in this project. The one that I just showed However, in my previous video, I mentioned that it's generally better to use only one font family for your web design project to maintain consistency and simplicity. Well, if you're interested in learning about font pairing, I'll cover in another video. Letter spacing is something many people don't talk about, or let's say unknown about its importance. But just like line height, letter spacing is also crucial components of typography. While line height determines the vertical space between lines of text, letter space determines the horizontal aspect, which means the space between individual letters. When it comes to letter spacing, the default setting in every browser is 0, unlike line height, which is set 120% by default in browsers. However, it's essential to adjust letter spacing just like line height based on the specific font and font size you are using. In this video, you'll learn how a small tweak to letter spacing can significantly enhance your design. Every fonts have their own features. Some look good with no letter spacing, but some look good when we do some letter spacing treatments. So I've used 4 different types of font and same font size. So for the first one, I've used Manrope font with 16 pixel font size and line height is 150%. While the letter spacing is 0, this looks good even if I've not done any treatment in the letter spacing. However, in the case of second font, which is Inclusive Sans, here I need to do some letter spacing adjustment to make it look more professional or look good. The font size is same, which is 16 pixel, and I adjusted the line height to 140% and letter spacing to -2 to make it look good. In the third one, I've used serif font. So as mentioned earlier, I added some line height to serif fonts because serif font need more line height in compared to sans fonts, and there's no letter spacing at all, and it still look good. And the last one is Work Sans font. So I have used same font size and line height, and for this I've used -3% letter spacing. So basically every font needs a separate letter spacing treatment. When the font size increases, the space between each letters also increase proportionately. So in the case of larger fonts, it does not look good when there are too much space between the letters. So that's why we need to fix letter spacing in the larger fonts. Here, what we need to do is the letter spacing is currently 0. We can give a negative letter spacing to make it look more balanced. So right now, I just gave 4% letter spacing. Now this looks more balanced and it's not disconnected as it was before. So the thumb rule, larger the font size, lesser the letter spacing, just like line height. Larger the font size, less the line height. Larger the font size, less the letter spacing as well. Another case is when the font weight decreases, the letter spacing need to decrease as well. Here, I've used the same font, but I've used like a lighter weight. On the top, it's semi-bold. Here, it's light. So let me just scroll up. Now, even if I'm using -4, it still look a bit disconnected in compare to above because our letter font weight has decreased to light. So lighter the font weight, the lesser letter spacing needs to be. So it was 4, I can do it like -6. Yeah, so this look more balanced. So basically, if the font is bolder, we can increase the letter spacing. If the font is lighter, we can decrease the letter spacing. Here, I have used wider letter spacing, and this feels really disconnected. You can see I've used like 20% letter spacing, and each of the word looks a bit disconnected, like extremely disconnected. However, If you give the same letter spacing for all caps words, it feels fine. Now that we have covered the important aspect of letter spacing, let's go back to our previous design and see how I have applied letter spacing in different components. In this design, I have done letter spacing treatment wherever required. For example, so here I didn't give any letter spacing, it's 0, either here. However, in this part, the letter spacing was important. So I've used this title and given the letter spacing of 20%. And for the larger heading, I've given -4 as a letter spacing. Down here, I've used 30 pixel font size and given -1% letter spacing. And for the 20 pixel font size mangrove font, there's no letter spacing. So this is how we have to give letter spacing. Like for different cases, we'll have to give different letter spacing. So letter spacing is also case by case, depending on the font size, and font weight. One important concept that often confuses people when discussing letter spacing is kerning. Letter spacing is also called tracking. Letter spacing or tracking applies uniform space between all characters in a word or a block of text, while kerning adjusts the space between individual letters. Let me explain to you with real examples here. In this screen, you can see the word kerning. When we give the letter spacing to this word, this one single word, you can see the spacing between R and N is quite tighter in compared to N, I, N, and these spacing. And in the case of web design, we normally do not give letter spacing to each character, which is technically possible, but it's not really needed to fix each and every details in the case of web design because we are using a larger paragraph or larger text. But when it comes to logo, it's very important to fix these small details. For example, in the case of logo, we have to do it each letters by letter. So I have separately typed all the characters and we have to fix manually here. Similarly, let's say in the case of serif font, if I reduce this letter spacing, these are overlap, but these are too far. So it's really not possible to reduce, to separate this. So what we need to do is we have to do it individually like this. For website, fine-tuning letter spacing in individual character is not something we need to do since letter spacing applies to entire text block. However, when it comes to logo design, fixing the spacing between each letter is very important. A logo is often just one or two words, and this attention to detail can transform a good logo into a great logo. That's why big companies spend thousands of dollars refining their logo. Often the only change they make is subtle adjustment to kerning. So, letter spacing is just as important as line height, and small adjustment can make a big difference in elevating your design. Now let's talk about display fonts. Display fonts are designed to be bold, decorative, and attention-grabbing. They are perfect for heading, titles, and other prominent large text elements. However, when we use it in a body text or paragraph, they can create readability issue. By display fonts, I mean fonts like. In this example, you can see that I have used display fonts here for larger text. It looks great in these cases. Now for small text, it can make the letters feel cramped or overly decorative. It's very difficult to read. Now in the second example, I have switched to a body font, which now enhances readability and creates more balanced look. While display fonts are specifically designed for large sizes, body fonts are made for both large and small sizes, making them suitable for everything from heading, paragraph, and data table, and even for UI elements. As I mentioned earlier in the previous chapter, if you're just starting out as a web designer, it's best to stick to a single font. And if you do so, make sure to choose a proper body font rather than a display font so that you can use it for both large heading and small paragraphs. Line length is basically how wide your text block is. It refers to number of characters that fits on a single line before breaking onto the next. If your lines are too short, the reader's eyes have to jump to next line way too often. If the lines are too long, the readers has to move their eyes across the entire screen before finding the next line. Look at the screen. Here you can see that the text spans the full 1300 pixel width of screen with 140 per line. The excessive line length forces the reader's eyes to travel too far, reducing readability. Now let's look at a better example. This text is constrained to 55 characters per line. Now it's much more readable, it's much more comfortable to read. So the short line length help maintain the reader's focus, reducing excessive horizontal movement. On the other hand, here's another example. I have set the text to just 15 characters per line. It feels awkward, unnatural, and disrupt readability. The lines are too short with unnecessary breaks. Now let's check another case. Here the text spans 150 pixel, yet it remains easy to read because I've kept the character counts between 50 to 70 characters per line. The key takeaway isn't just about restricting text to a narrow width. It's about maintaining 50 to 70 characters per line for readability. Even with a wider layout, you can achieve this balance by adjusting the font size accordingly to keep the text comfortable to read. Let's go back to our previous design to see how I have applied the principle of line length. On this website, I have set the container width to 1300 pixel. However, for the article section where the font size is 18 pixel, I want to maintain line length of 50 to 70 characters per line for better readability. And to achieve this, I adjusted the width of the article section to 800 pixel for a comfortable reading experience. Regardless of container width, maintaining a character count of 50 to 70 per line significantly enhances readability and user experience. This principle applies across different large screen devices and screen sizes, whether on a desktop, tablet, but for the mobile, there's a slight difference which I'll be covering in our next chapter. By the way, you might have noticed that I've used fewer characters per line for headings. Since headings are typically short, it makes them readable anyways. There's no strict minimum requirement of characters per line because heading can be as short as 5 characters. Before we talk about responsive typography, it's important to understand what is responsive design. If you are not familiar with what responsive design is, I've covered it in my previous video. You'll find the link in the description below. But in short, responsive design means your website adapts to different screen sizes like mobile, tablet, and desktop for consistent and smooth experience. Most designers spend a lot of time making their layout responsive, but forget that overall typography needs to be responsive as well. And when typography is not responsive, it impacts both usability and readability. Also, when we talk about responsive typography, it goes beyond mobile devices. Typography needs to be adjusted for laptops, large screen desktops, tablets, iPad, and mobile. In this video, I've covered the 4 things you really need to think about when making your typography responsive. One common mistake that I see with web designers is that they adjust the font size but forget to tweak line height and spacing. When it comes to responsive typography, it's not limited to just adjusting font size. It's about an overall aspect of typography like font size, line height, letter spacing, and even line length. All of these needs to be adapted based on the screen sizes. For example, on desktop, if you are using 18 pixel body font, and 96 pixel heading in this section, let's say heading. That same 96 pixel on heading will look huge on mobile. So let's say if I make it 96, this is how it's going to look. So we have to scale it down. In this case, as I'm using serif, the 30 pixel looks pretty good. And as I mentioned earlier in my previous video, that everything is case by case. So 30 pixel looks good in case of this font. Maybe for other heading, it might be 26, it might be maybe 35. Also, for the body text, which is 18 pixel in the desktop, I kept it around 16 pixel in the mobile. And one of the suggestion is avoid going below 14 pixel. It might look good in Figma when we check here, but when we actually build it and view it in actual device, it becomes hard to read, especially those who use small screen mobile phones. And yes, when we have changed the font size, let's not forget adjusting the line height. So here, the body font is 18. I have line height of 150. Here, I made the line height of 140 with 16 pixel font size. There's no perfect rules or let's say universal rule. It depends on the fonts you are using. But the general guideline is keep the line height of 1.4 to 1.6 times of the 16 pixel body font. So this is just in the case of 16 pixel body font, 1.4 and 1.6. And in the case of heading for 30 pixel font size, the line height, which was 140, now it becomes 120. And in this case, we really don't need to update letter spacing for this one because it looks good anyways. But if you go down, in this heading, I have adjusted letter spacing. So this is the subheading, let's say, which is 32 pixel font size with 150 line height with -2 letter spacing. Here, I reduce it down to 20 pixel and 150 line height and -1 letter spacing. So in short, adjusting typography is as important as adjusting the layout of your website from desktop to tablet to mobile. And when we do those adjustments, we have to adjust the font size, line height, and letter spacing as well. On desktop, it's very common to have a full range of typography hierarchy, let's say from H1 through H6 and maybe 2 or 3 body font sizes. But on mobile, that's too much. You really don't need 6 different font sizes on small screens. Instead, simply use 3 to 5 level of hierarchy like large heading or subheading, body text, or maybe a caption. In this example, you can see that I have used multiple hierarchies in the desktop version. So here you can see the first heading is 259 pixel, and then there's one on the top text. This is 26 pixel. This font is 18 pixel. This title is 120 pixel. These two are 26 again, and so on. So I'll not go in details here. But in the case of mobile, what I have done is the top one heading is 64 pixel. And this text is 16 pixel. This is 16. These titles are 16 again. And this one is 40. So I just reduce from 1, 2, 3, 4 hierarchies to just 1, 2, and 3. Also, I use this same font size even in the heading. One of the idea could be to use the hierarchy limited by just making the heading bold, keeping the same font size as body font, just like I have done in this example. Here you can see the body font is 16 pixel, and I made the heading 16 pixel as well and just made the heading bold. So basically, in the case of mobile, we just don't want to have too many hierarchies. And that's why it's always good to use font width variation so that we can use that to our advantage. You can stick to the same font size, but create contrast with bold, semi-bold, or lightweight instead of just changing font size. When it comes to line length on the desktop, the ideal range is 50 to 70 characters per line. And for the mobile, it's 30 to 40 characters per line. And then for the tablet, it's 40 to 60 characters per line. So in this screen, I've set the font size to 16 pixel, which gives us around 25 to 35 characters per line, which is perfect for mobile readability. As mobile screens are already narrow by their nature, we don't need to give too much left and right padding, just like we used to give in desktop and tablet. So we can just give the 100% width of characters in the case of mobile and just give around 20 pixel padding left and right. So basic idea is to maintain the character counts per line, which is 25 to 35 characters in the case of mobile, and we can just make it full width. If your design supports both light and dark mode, typography needs special attention for both cases. Fonts tends to look much thinner in a darker background. So let me show it here. So if you're using a font weight of 400, or let's say light in the light mode, if you're using the same font here in the dark mode, it looks a bit difficult to read. So I'm sharing my screen. So if you really check in the mobile devices, then you'll feel the difference. So that's why it's very good practice to adjust the font weight when we have a darker background. So normally a good practice is to make it font weight of 500, or let's say font weight of regular or medium, depending on which font you are using. So basically, we have to treat font weight differently in the case of dark and the light background. So next time you are making a layout responsive, don't just focus on layout. Make sure your typography is responsive too, because good typography isn't just about looking good. It's about making people want to read your content on 32-inch monitor, a tablet, a laptop, or a mobile phone that they carry. In my previous videos, I mentioned that using a single font is a great practice, especially if you are new to design. It keeps things simple, clean, and consistent. But as your design skill grows, you'll find situations where using multiple fonts becomes not just helpful but essential. This is where the art of font pairing comes into play. Font pairing is the art of combining two or more typefaces to enhance the visual appeal and readability of design. It's like a musical band. Each instrument plays a different role: guitar, keyboard, drum, vocal. Individually, each one is great, but when played in harmony, they create music. Now imagine one musician plays offbeat, it quickly turns the music into noise. The same goes for font. When done right, font pairing creates visual hierarchy, adds personality, and helps guide the reader's eye across the layout. But when done poorly, it feels disjoint, confusing, and hard to read. While sticking to a single font can create consistency, using font pair can create depth, hierarchy, and personality to your web design. In this video, I'll be sharing some guidelines for effective font pairing. The most successful font pairing involves a high degree of contrast. This means selecting fonts that are noticeably different from each other, but still share some common traits. Let me show you my website. On my website, I have used two different fonts, Usher and Mandrop. They're completely different from each other, but even when fonts are different, their personality still match the brand. If I use different font in the heading like Lobster, it does not complement the body font Mandrop or the entire website. Let's go back to our previous design. Here, I've used instrument. In the body, I've used mandrobe. And if you see the home page, the top heading is different and the body text are different. So the font that you pick must be different, but it should have a same personality to match the entire design. If the fonts are almost identical in style, weight, or shape, they can create visual confusion and make the design feel unprofessional. The purpose of font pairing is to establish contrast and hierarchy. If your headline and body text looks nearly the same, there's no point in using two different fonts. Let me share my screen. Here, you can see that I've used two different fonts, but they almost look identical. This provides no clear hierarchy and adds no real value to the design. In fact, it would be better to just use the same font in such cases. Using two similar fonts creates unnecessary tension without purpose. So it's always better to use fonts that are visually distinct yet share a common personality or tone. If you're struggling with font pairing, one idea could be using superfamily font. Superfamily fonts are those that includes both serif and sans version in a single font family. For example, here you can see I have used PT sans for the body and PT serif for the heading. Then in this design, I use Roboto slab for heading and Roboto for the body. Also in this one, I use source serif for the heading and source sans for the body. And here, one more. IVM sans for the body and IVM plex serif for the heading. So basically, the superfamily font approach helps you choose font that provides contrast while maintaining a consistent personality. However, if you like to pair fonts that don't belong to superfamily font, I'll be sharing some helpful font pairing tools with you. But before that, there's one more important tip you need to know. It's generally a best practice to limit number of fonts you use in design to 2 or 3. Using too many fonts can make your design feel cluttered and confusing. Stick to one font for heading and another for body, and perhaps a third for accent or special elements like buttons. Data table is very ideal practice. Now that I've covered all the important aspects of font pairing, I'll be sharing some of the important tools for you to use for font pairing. Here's the first website that you can refer. It's fontpair.co. Here you can see all the different font pairs that they have done. So for the title, they've used this font called Chivo, and for the body, they've used Cambo as a body. Similarly, if you scroll down, Mandop, Sora, so these kind of combinations. So I'll not say this is the perfect, but this will surely help if you are pretty new to font pairing. You can take this as a reference. Fontpair.co. The next is monotype.com/font pairing. So here, what you can do is you can use this generate pair, and it will generate you the different pairs. So Metro SSI for the heading, Arial for the body. So these kind of font pair. And not just that, there's one thing that you can do is swap as well. So if it's relevant for you, you can swap the heading and body font. It depends on which website you are building for which brand. So depending on that, you can use a different heading in a serif and body in a sans, or sans heading and serif body. It totally depends on the website that you're building. So you can keep on generating fonts by clicking on, and it will just randomly generate the font pair. So it's pretty good compared to other tools. So it generates pretty good font pairs. And one last is typ.io. I personally like this because this is like not exactly a tool, but they have listed all the good websites that have followed a good font pair. So you can see the font being used in the actual project. For example, if you really like the font pair of this website, then you can check from this typ.io. So they're all the list. You can use it as a reference and use the font pair that all the great website, all the professional website that has been built by very good designers. So you can use this as a reference to pick the fonts for your design. Font pairing and typography are essential part of web design, and there's no end to learning them. Keep practicing, and your design will keep improving. Also, keep checking websites made by great designers. You can learn a lot just by observing their font pairing choices. So keep browsing and keep learning. If you have been following my videos from the beginning, you might have noticed some fonts that I often use. In this video, I'll walk you through some of the website I have built and the fonts I use while designing them. So this is the website that I've already shared before. It's my personal website. In this website, I have used the font Usher for the main heading. And then for rest of the page, I've used Manrope for the body as well as the headings, all the subheadings. And this is spineevents.com. In this one, I've used Manrope for the body, and for the heading, I've used this italic version of instrument serif. Here I've used instrument serif as well, and rest of all the heading and subheading or the paragraphs are Manrope. Even for this one, I've used instrument serif for the heading. I just use the normal version, and here below I've used the italic version, and all other section body fonts or the buttons are Manrope. This one is Recraft. For this one, I've used class display for the heading, and for the body fonts, I've used Satoshi. This is Cherry. So for this website, I've used Viodra Livre for the headings. So all these are Viodra Livre font. And then for the body text like these, I've used the font called Ubuntu. Another is Game Changers New York. So for this one, I have used Beavis for the heading. So this is Beavis. And then for the body, I've used Questrial font. So this is Novara. In this one, I have used the instrument serif italic version and Manrope. So this is combination of instrument serif and Manrope again. So another is Stupa. For this one, for the heading, I've used Playfair Display. This one is Playfair Display. And for all others, like body font, I've used Manrope again. And last one, in this one, I've used 3 different fonts. I normally use 2 fonts in most cases, but for this one, just for the decoration purpose, I've used 3 fonts. So the first font I've used for this heading is Derivia. And then for this script text, I've used a font called Metra. And for all other body fonts, I've used the font Poppins. So the list of the fonts are Acer, Instrument Serif, Class Display, Satoshi, Viodra Livre, Ubuntu, Beavis, Questrial, Playfair Display, Poppins, Derivia, Matra, and Madrope. If you're wondering where you can find all these fonts, these are the websites that I've used to download these fonts. The first one is Google Fonts, and the website is fonts.google.com. Another is FontShare, which is fontshare.com. Then Adobe Fonts, fonts.adobe.com. Dafont, the website is dafont.com. And another is typetype.org. And last, unblast.com/fonts. So these are some of the websites where you can file all the beautiful fonts that you can use for your project. And I've also shared the link down in this YouTube video description as well. If you have come this far of this course, I have something for you. To create this entire video, I use Figma to showcase the fonts and different use cases. I want to share this Figma file with everyone who's interested in learning from it, so I've made it accessible to you. You can find the link to the Figma file in this description below. Thank you so much for watching the entire video. I hope it was helpful to you. And by the way, if you're wondering how I made this video, let me give you a quick glimpse of my studio. Yes, I made this in my small room without any help. I tried my best to do the camera work, lights, editing, and more importantly, writing scripts for the entire course. If you'd like to learn more about web design and development, please subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.